The alarms began long before the first transmission arrived, a deep, thrumming vibration that rolled through the superstructure of the UNS Deliverance and stirred a primal instinct in every human on board, a sensation like the air itself was bracing for an impact their minds had no reference for, and even Captain Mara Kalin, who had weathered tactical nightmares on the Hellion frontier and fought through the orbital fires above what remained of old Earth, felt the unfamiliar chill of something, vast and malignant, stirring in the void beyond the hull. The bridge lit up in cascading waves of amber warning text, holographic displays crackling as the distortion outside swelled like a spinning bruise in the fabric of space-time, a vortex not of swirling color, but a devouring absence, a distortion that bent starlight around it until even the veteran navigators exchanged looks of quiet horror, because they had never seen anything that behaved like a living eclipse. Mara stepped forward, boots echoing across the deck, heart pounding like a war drum against her ribs, and she stared at the anomaly as it twisted, convulsed, and then began to peel itself open with a sickening elegance, like a flower blooming in reverse, revealing an obsidian construct with shifting fractal edges that appeared to fold and unfold through dimensions a human I wasn't equipped to interpret. Static rippled through the bridge speakers as the senses began to contradict themselves, readings stacking into impossible values that should not coexist. Negative mass signatures, phantom gravimetric echoes, non-existent radiation frequencies, and the ship's AI stuttered repeatedly as it tried to translate a nightmare into equations. No one on the bridge spoke. Silence held them in an invisible clamp as the construct hovered, motionless yet seething with intent, its surfaces rippling with geometric patterns that made the mind ache, and when the first telepathic pulse struck them, it wasn't sound or light, but violent intrusion that hammered directly into the raw center of consciousness, a layered, discordant whisper that rang through skulls like cracked glass. Humans, primitive anomalies, you have violated Dominion space and shall kneel or perish. Mara inhaled sharply, her knees nearly buckling as the alien message carved jagged edges into her thoughts, but she forced herself upright, fingers curling around the command rail until her knuckles whitened, and she stared back at the impossible construct as if sheer force could shield her crew. Around her, officers gasped or staggered, a few collapsing under the pressure of the psychic assault. Yet even amid the chaos, she noticed something else on the starboard scan. Faint, flickering life signs drifting behind a fractal colossus, signatures that fluttered like dying embers. Her breath hitched when she recognized them for what they were. Fragments of the colony fleet humanity had dispatched 3 decades earlier, a fleet that vanished without final transmission, lost in silence that had haunted the archives ever since. Their vessels floated broken, hollow, as if the essence of life had been sucked from them without leaving so much as scorch marks or hull breaches, and the realization struck her with a cold clarity that cut deeper than fear. The Dominion had been here long before the Deliverance arrived. They had been waiting, watching, hunting humanity without humanity ever realizing the war had already begun. Another psychic pulse slammed into her skull, stronger this time, rattling the bones behind her ears, and the voice returned with hiss of contempt, "Submit, intruders, or be erased." Lights flickered. The air grew thin for a heartbeat, and condensation frosted across the interior window panels as if the temperature had plunged beneath freezing, yet Mara lifted her chin, refusing to let the entity feel victory. She ordered an open channel, even though she wasn't certain any human technology could transmit into whatever dimension the Dominion used for communication. But before she could speak, the anomaly pulsed violently, emitting a gravitational wave so dense and sharp that the Deliverance buckled under its weight. Consoles exploded in a shower of sparks. Officers were thrown from their stations, and the ship squealed like wounded metal as the engines choked and died. The starfield outside dimmed as if a curtain of shadow had wrapped around the vessel, suffocating it, and Mara clenched her teeth as emergency systems failed to initialize. The Dominion vessel wasn't responding to them. It was demonstrating power, dominance, inevitability, like a predator toying with prey, because destruction was not yet as satisfying as obedience. Darkness rolled across the bridge as the main lights failed, leaving only the reluctant flicker of emergency strips that pulse like a fading heartbeat. Mara struggled to stand, chest tight, breath shallow, because she hated the sensation that now seeped through the air like a toxin, powerlessness, a condition she had sworn never to allow onto her ship again after the tragedy she had survived. Yet even as she forced her trembling frame upright, the anomaly swelled again, and this time it burst open with a violent rift of shadow and warped starlight, releasing something massive and churning from its depths, something that moved with a bizarre blend of liquid motion and metallic rigidity. Something that screamed in frequencies that bypassed sound and burrowed straight into instinct. The crew cried out as the monstrosity emerged fully into real space, its many limbs unfurling like serrated wings as the Dominion construct behind it pulsed in approval, and Mara felt her heart hammer against her ribs as she realized the Deliverance was not just trapped. It was exposed, isolated, and facing an enemy that viewed humanity not as adversaries, but as prey meant for extinguishing. The temperature dropped again. Frost crept along the overhead conduits, and the creature outside opened eyes, impossible eyes, shifting in pattern and color like they were made from collapsing stars, and Mara felt its gaze pierce straight into the core of her being as the Dominion whispered one last time, soft as a blade against skin, "Kneel human, for your first contact becomes your final breath." But she drew herself upright despite the crushing pressure, blood trickling from her nose, and she whispered into the shattered bridge, "We do not bow," even though she didn't know whether the Dominion could hear defiance spoken in human breath. And then the creature lunged, reality bending around it like rippling water, preparing to tear the Deliverance apart as the crew struggled in powerless silence. And the nightmare truly began. The thing that emerged from the fracture anomaly moved with a grotesque grace that defied physics, a shifting amalgamation of metal and something disturbingly organic, as though strands of living tissue and liquid geometry had been fused into a single impossible entity that pulsed with cold violet luminescence, and every time its surface rippled, the sensor consoles aboard the Deliverance shrieked with conflicting data that made even hardened veterans flinch as the readings spiked through. Impossible ranges, feeding contradictions into ship's failing AI until its voice dissolved into static and broken syllables. Mara braced herself against the nearest bulkhead as artificial gravity flickered, her boots scraping against the trembling floor while the monstrosity unfurled jaw-like plates and elongated limbs that extended into vacuum like feeling tendrils, each one moving with the deliberation of a predator savoring the inevitability of the hunt. And when those limbs brushed the flickering remnants of Deliverance's shield envelope, the entire ship groaned like a living creature under the weight of something ancient pressing against its bones. Frost spiraled across the interior windows in delicate spiderweb patterns as the temperature inside dropped unnaturally fast. Emergency heating systems struggling to counter the Dominion's presence, and Mara clenched her jaw as her breath fogged in air, her heart pounding like a captive animal slamming itself against ribs that felt too small to hold the dread building inside her. The psychic voice returned, louder now, as though the creature had extended its consciousness like a net across the ship, weaving into neural patterns with surgical precision. And the words vibrated inside her skull with an icy malice that made her vision blur. "Kneel, anomalies, surrender your pattern or be harvested," and several crew members collapsed as blood trickled from their noses and ears, their minds buckling under the psychic pressure as though invisible claws scraped across the fragile folds of human thought. Mara forced herself upright, teeth grinding as she resisted the invasive tide pressing against her consciousness, a pressure that felt like it was trying to peel her mind open like a rusted panel. But she shoved back hard with sheer will, defiance flaring through her synapses like sparks in a storm, because she refused to give a Dominion anything: fear, submission, or access to the vulnerabilities she kept locked behind years of scars and discipline. Yet even in her mental pushback, she caught a glimpse of the creature's intent. Flashes of memories not her own, distorted visions of countless species bound before the Dominion's impossible shadow, their worlds dissolving into dust and silence as the construct consumed them. And among those scenes she saw something else, twisted fragments of the lost human colony fleet, not simply destroyed but dissected, minds unraveled, bodies hollowed, their final screams echoing through a realm outside time, until only quiet void remained. That forced glimpse sharpened her resolve like a blade drawn across stone. She shoved the Dominion's probing tendrils from her thoughts with an emotional surge of pure fury, the echo of billions of human ancestors roaring through her veins, and for an instant the creature faltered, its shifting plate stuttering like corrupted data as it recoiled from the unexpected resistance. But then its many eyes refocused, their shapes rearranging into a lattice of burning violet rings that pulse in unison, and the monstrosity attacked with renewed hunger, wrapping 3 of its shadow limbs around the Deliverance's hull with a sickening creak that shook the ship from bow to stern. Metal strained, bulkheads groaned, lights flickered as power conduits overloaded, sparks showering across the bridge while terrified officers scrambled to stabilize systems that insisted on shutting down under the Dominion's influence, and Mara knew with a cold, sinking certainty that if they didn't break free in the next moments, the creature would crush the ship like brittle glass. With engines dead, weapons offline, and communications failing, she was left with one option, a desperate, forbidden maneuver that had been developed during the darkest days of the Outer Colonies War, the deep core graviton ignition. It was a technology designed not for combat, but for last resort escape, a core burst that could momentarily twist localized gravity into a pulse strong enough to tear a vessel from an enemy's hold. But it came with a devastating risk. If the ignition timing fluctuated by even a millisecond, the hypercompressed graviton wave could implode the ship from within, crushing everyone aboard before they even realized they were dead. Mara didn't hesitate. Fear sharpened her decisions rather than slowing them, and she raced toward the core chamber with the urgency of someone who understood that hesitation equaled death, her boots thundering along metal that trembled beneath her with every squeeze of the Dominion's claws. Crew members reached out as she passed, some begging for orders, others simply staring in stunned disbelief as the hull groaned under the creature's constriction, but she only shouted for them to brace for core ignition and hold fast anything bolted down, because what she was about to do would either save them or obliterate them in an instant. She reached the core chamber just as the ship lurched violently, the floor tilting under her feet as one of the Dominion's limbs dug deeper into the hull, crushing the outer framework like soft clay. The core chamber lights flickered wildly, casting warped shadows across the swirling hypermatter sphere that pulsed at the center of its containment ring, and Mara sprinted to the console, fingers flying across controls even as warning sirens howled in protest, the ship's systems trying desperately to prevent her from overriding safety protocols. The psychic voice surged into her skull again, angrier this time, as though the Dominion sensed her intent. You cannot escape, human. You cannot resist inevitability. Your pattern is already claimed. But Mara slammed her palm onto the activation pad, initiating the deep core ignition with a forceful command that rattled her bones, and the chamber erupted in blinding white light as the core began to compress gravitational energy into a needle-thin pulse. The ship screamed. The walls shook violently as though reality itself was tearing at the seams, and Mara threw herself against the console, bracing as the Dominion's claws tightened around the hull with desperate fury, its many eyes widening in sudden alarm as the gravity field twisted violently. And then the core discharged. A gravitational shockwave erupted outward, shattering the Dominion's hold like brittle bone, hurling the monstrosity backward in a distorted blur of limbs and fractured geometry. The Deliverance spun wildly, emergency systems flickering back to life in fragmented pulses as Mara clung to the console, her heartbeat hammering in her ears while the universe twisted violently around her. Alarms blared. The hull creaked. Crew members shouted as systems rebooted in chaotic waves. And when the shaking finally subsided, the Deliverance drifted free, battered, wounded, barely functional, but alive. Mara staggered to her feet, panting, staring in awe and horror through the viewport as the Dominion creature reassembled itself, its shattered plates flowing back into alignment with sickening ease. And as its eyes reignited, glowing brighter and sharper than before, Mara realized with cold dread that clenched her stomach. The shockwave hadn't defeated the creature. It had taught it. The Dominion was evolving, learning, adapting to human defiance. And its next strike would be worse. Much worse. The moment the shuttle doors sealed behind Aaron, and the world lurched into a dim, trembling descent into the sublevels of the Echelon Citadel. The sense of dread that had been stalking him since the first broadcast intensified like a tightening fist around his ribs, and as the cramped interior rattled and dropped to the layers of the alien megastructure, he found himself almost wishing the Zelani guards would speak again, because their silence was somehow worse, as though they feared the place they were taking him even more than he did. The shuttle plunged down a shaft lined with pulsing crystalline conduits that carried streams of energy like rivers of light, converging into deeper, more ancient chambers beneath the city, and Aaron recognized the unmistakable resonance in the hum surrounding him, a frequency that brushed against his skull and triggered the faintest echo of the artifact's whisper, as it were calling to him from the dark below. And when the craft finally slowed to a halt on a platform of interlocking hexagonal plates, he stepped out to find himself in a cavernous hall of colossal, slanted pillars, carved with symbols older than the Zelani Empire itself, a place that smelled of dust, memory, and power deliberately buried away. The guards hurried him forward, though they kept glancing nervously at the far end of the chamber, where a circular well descended into absolute blackness, and suddenly a low vibration rolled through the stones like a muffled heartbeat, causing the guards to stiffen and raise their weapons. But the sound ceased just as quickly, leaving an aftertaste of something alive watching from below, and the lead guard motioned to Aaron to keep walking as they approached a raised platform wired into a sprawling lattice of conduits that fed into the abyssal pit. As Aaron stepped closer, he felt a pull, subtle but unmistakable, as though a thread in his mind were being tugged by an unseen hand, and the artifact within his skull emitted a brief flicker of heat that shot down his spine, forcing him to grit his teeth until the sensation subsided, and only then did he notice a gigantic construct suspended above the well, an enormous ring structure composed of bone-colored alloy and cracked crystal veins, humming with slow, deliberate rhythm like a breathing organism. Before he could ask what it was, a voice boomed through the hall, echoing off the pillars with such force that the guards knelt instantly, while Aaron staggered back in shock, because it wasn't a spoken voice at all, but a pressure inside his thoughts that felt intrusive, cold, and impossibly old, and the alien presence declared that the human threat had awakened the Oracle core prematurely, demanding that the bearer of the ancient seed, the human among them, be brought forward. The guard seized Aaron and dragged him toward the glowing platform, and though he shouted for him to stop, his words vanished in a thunderous psychic reverberation shaking the chamber. The Oracle core, as the voice called itself, lowered the colossal ring until it hovered mere meters above Aaron, blasting him with a wave of static that made his skin crawl, and a cold reality settled in as the presence explained that the humans had become an anomaly, an unexpected variable possessing evolutionary acceleration beyond projection, a threat to the cosmic balance that the Oracle had preserved for millennia, and that the artifact implanted in Aaron had been designed not as a weapon, but as a fail-safe, capable of rebooting the Oracle's perception field if it ever encountered a consciousness outside its predictive parameters. Aaron struggled against the guards, bewildered. Why him? Why humanity? Why was this ancient entity so afraid of them? And when the Oracle answered, it did so with projection straight into his core memory, revealing star systems burning under human retaliation, fleets pushing deeper into alien territory, and civilizations retreating from the ferocity humans unleashed when cornered. But this projection was distorted, exaggerated, like a paranoid fantasy rather than objective truth. And Aaron realized the Oracle wasn't interpreting humanity as they were, but as it feared they might become. The guard stepped back as beams of pale light rose from the platform, forming a cage around Aaron, while the Oracle declared to extract the failsafe manually and reset its own predictive matrix, a process that would inevitably kill him. But the artifact in his skull surged violently, rejecting the Oracle's psychic intrusion with such force that cracks splintered across the Ring construct above. Alarms blared throughout the chamber, and the guards scrambled, shouting in their native tongue as the oracle roared in frustration, and Aaron felt a blazing thread of information burn through his mind, a message from the artifact itself. This wasn't just a failsafe. It was a key that could unlock something sealed beneath the citadel. The floor trembled as ancient machinery awakened, shaking the cavern until dust rained from the impossible height of the ceiling, and the oracle shrieked that the human consciousness was incompatible, unpredictable, uncontrollable, declaring that the extraction process would commence immediately. Aaron screamed as a land of energy stabbed into the back of the skull, not physically but psychically, tearing at the edges of his thoughts, ripping through memories and emotions in search of the seed the oracle believed it needed, and he fell to his knees as the artifact fought back, sending pulses through his veins that made his fingertips glow faintly with residual energy. The guards fled in terror as the ring began to spin faster and faster, drawing in beams of energy from surrounding conduits until the entire chamber was flooded with blinding white light, and Aaron, gasping, realized that the oracle wasn't just trying to extract the artifact. It was trying to overwrite his consciousnness entirely, to rewrite him into something it could control. But the artifact had other plans, whispering a single word in a voice he recognized as his own, spoken from a different lifetime. Descend. As the platform cracked apart under the overload, and the ring screamed under the strain, the floor at the center split open, revealing a spiraling staircase descending into a higher density darkness that swallowed light as though it were a living thing. And without warning, the artifact seized control of Aaron's limbs, forcing him to stumble toward the opening, while the oracle unleashed a psychic blast intended to annihilate him. The blast struck, but instead of dying, Aaron felt himself pulled downward by an invisible force, down into the abyss, past the reach of the oracle's perception, falling into a void drenched in a cold that wasn't physical but conceptual. And as he plummeted, the last thing he heard was the oracle's enraged roar echoing behind him, promising that whatever slept below would not save him. But the artifact's whisper grew louder, clearer, saying it had waited for this moment through countless ages. Then Aaron's feet slammed into solid ground. The abyss vanished, and he stood alone in a colossal chamber illuminated by faintly pulsing runes older than the oracle itself, confronted by a towering silhouette emerging from the dark, something that had been sealed away long before the Zilani ever existed, something that now stirred fully awake as a single burning eye opened in the gloom, regarding him with a recognition that froze his breath in his throat, and in a voice that reverberated through the bones of the universe itself, the entity murmured that humanity had finally arrived. The colossal chamber hummed with a resonance that was neither sound nor vibration, but a pressure woven directly into Aaron's bones, as though the very fabric of the place acknowledged his presence after untold millennia. And the towering silhouette that stepped from the suffocating dark radiated an ancient gravity that made the air thicken around him, its single luminous eye burning like the core of a dying star, assessing him with an intensity that pinned him to the cold stone floor while the artifact in his skull flared painfully, as if recognizing a master it had long awaited. Aaron stumbled backward, overwhelmed, but the entity's gaze followed him with deliberate slowness, and its voice, when it spoke again, was a deep tidal rumble that made the runes carved into the titanic walls brighten in sequence, awakening conduits of forgotten machinery that sent ripples of energy through the chamber. And the entity declared itself as the remnant sovereign, last of the architects who had shaped the original lattice of sentience among the stars, long before the oracle arose as a derivative guardian, long before empires like the Zilani even struggled into existence. Aaron felt the meaning behind every word rather than hearing them, each one pressed into his mind like an echo from a dream not his own, and the sovereign explained that humanity's arrival had been foreseen not through prophecy, but through probability, a species whose evolutionary trajectory was never contained within the oracle's predictive field, a species that grew more defiant, more unpredictable, more unwilling to kneel with each generation, a species that represented the one variable capable of destabilizing the oracle's control of the galaxy's collective fate. Aaron shook his head. insisting softly that humans didn't seek domination, that they didn't want to conquer anything except the fear forced upon them. But the sovereign countered with chilling calmness, stating that intent was irrelevant to the Oracle because unpredictability itself was considered a threat to the enforced equilibrium it spent eons sculpting, and the artifact placed inside Aaron had been originally crafted by the architects as an anchor to ensure that no single guiding intelligence, especially one as rigid and obsessional as the Oracle, could ever rewrite the destiny of emergent species. However, the Oracle, having gradually corrupted its own directive over countless cycles, had subverted the artifact's purpose and attempted to use it as a failsafe to eliminate anomalies, and therefore implanted within him not to empower humanity, but to surveil and control it. Yet the artifact had awakened prematurely due to humanity's escalating conflict with the Zilani, allowing Aaron to survive the Oracle's extraction attempt and find his way to the chamber sealed beneath the citadel. The Sovereign stepped closer, its enormous form shimmering with a shifting metallic texture, halfway between matter and energy, its mere presence warping the air with a subtle gravitational ripple that made Aaron's legs shake, and the Sovereign explained that the artifact was now fully awakened, its original directives restored, meaning Aaron had become a conduit for architect-level authority. And this revelation hit him like a blow because nothing in his life had prepared him to wield a power older than civilizations. Yet the Sovereign insisted that such power could not remain dormant. If the Oracle detected his survival, it would unleash catastrophic measures, purging entire systems in an attempt to isolate the human anomaly and collapse their timeline of expansion. Aaron protested. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't a chosen one. He wasn't anything except a tired man thrust into cosmic machinery he never asked to touch. But the Sovereign's gaze deepened until it felt as though Aaron's memories were laid bare in front of it. His childhood on a dying outpost, his losses, his fears, his stubborn refusal to surrender even when the universe stacked itself against him. And the Sovereign stated plainly that this was precisely why humans frightened the Oracle. Humanity's strength was not conquest, but resilience, the refusal to cease being themselves even under civilizations that dwarfed them. The chamber trembled suddenly as a distant shockwave rippled down the shaft above, dust raining in thin streams from the jagged ceiling, and the Sovereign's head tilted slightly, as if listening to a voice Aaron could not hear. Then it informed him that the Oracle had discovered his descent into the sealed chamber and deployed annihilation drones to purge the sublevels, meaning they had only minutes before the entire cavern was sterilized by a collapsing singularity field. Aaron felt cold panic rise, but the Sovereign extended a hand the size of a starfighter cockpit, and though its form appeared terrifying, its touch never came. Instead, a column of shimmering geometry unfolded from its palm and encircled Aaron, scanning him with intricate fractal patterns that hovered around his body, analyzing the artifact embedded in his skull. The Sovereign observed that the artifact was responding unusually, cross-linking itself with his neural patterns in ways that suggested not mere activation but adaptation, as though it had selected him specifically. And though Aaron wanted to reject the idea, the artifact pulsed warmly behind his eyes, syncing with his heartbeat as if an affirmation. The Sovereign told him plainly that he now had two choices: flee upward, attempt to escape the citadel, and die with billions when the Oracle enacted its purge protocols, or awaken the artifact fully and accept control of an architect command thread capable of rewriting the Oracle's governing imperatives, a task that required his consent, his mind, and his willingness to confront an intelligence older than his species. Aaron's chest tightened. How could he possibly accept something like that? But the Sovereign leaned down until its enormous eye was inches from him, and in that blinding pupil Aaron saw flickering visions. Humans fighting desperately against Zilani forces, cities on fire, mothers shielding their children, soldiers holding the line despite impossible odds, all struggling not for conquest but for survival. And he knew then that humanity could never win through strength alone. Someone had to break the cycle the Oracle had imposed. Someone had to force the galaxy to see humans not as a threat, but as a right to exist. The ground shuddered violently as a deafening roar echoed from above, the entrance collapsing inward as massive drones the size of armored dropships descended the shaft, their spherical bodies lined with glowing apertures that crackled with singularity charges, and the Sovereign's voice thundered with urgency, commanded him to choose. Aaron clenched his fists, breath shaking, heart pounding, and with a surge of raw determination, he shouted that he would not let anyone decide humanity's fate for them. Not anymore, not ever. And the artifact erupted with blinding force, sending fractal energy spiraling outward that illuminated the entire cavern in a storm of luminous patterns. The Sovereign released a sound like a triumphant chord resonating through reality itself, and declared a command thread was now open. Aaron merely had to take it. The drones opened fire, collapsing the chamber as gravity distortions tore the stone apart. But before the wave hit him, the Sovereign extended its arm and impaled the darkness with a beam of pure architect energy, holding back the collapse just long enough for Aaron to reach deep into his own mind, grasp the impossible sequence unfolding inside him, and take hold of something that was neither physical nor mental but conceptual, a thread woven from the architecture of existence itself. The moment he touched it, the universe seemed to stop breathing. The Sovereign bowed its head in acknowledgement, and the collapsing cavern froze mid-destruction as if time itself hesitated. And the final words the Sovereign spoke before the chamber shattered entirely were that the Oracle would sense this act instantly, and when it did, the war that followed would either destroy humanity forever or reveal the truth of what they truly were. The universe lurched around Aaron as if existence itself were momentarily unsure of its own continuity. And the instant he grasped the architect command thread, everything dissolved into a storm of fractal geometry and cascading timelines. Hundreds of realities branching and collapsing around like shards of mirrored glass, suspended in a void without direction or time. Each fragment replaying moments of cosmic history. Civilizations rising and dying. Stars being born and devoured. Species evolving under trials they never understood. And woven among them were distorted visions of humanity's own path, threads of possibility that shimmer with violent brilliance. Futures where humans rose triumphant, others where they were extinguished within centuries, and some where they diverged into something so alien the Oracle refused to acknowledge them as descendants at all. Aaron felt himself drifting through these visions not as a spectator, but as a fulcrum, each outcome pivoting subtly as he breathed, thought, existed, and the artifact amplified his mind until it felt like he were piloting a storm of infinite scope. Then everything snapped back into place, and Aaron found himself standing not in a ruined cavern, but in a vast cosmic plane shaped from glimmering computational structures. This was the Oracle's core perception field, the very heart of its consciousness, where probabilities were woven into predictions, and predictions hardened into directives that shaped the fate of entire species. The Oracle materialized before him as a colossal geometric entity, constantly shifting form between lattices of light and spiraling crystalline frameworks, and his voice thundered directly into his mind with fury that nearly crushed his coherence, accusing him of violating sacred balances, of taking control of power not meant for creatures like him, and demanding he release the architect thread or face annihilation along with all humanity. Aaron staggered under the psychic pressure, but unlike before, the artifact pulsed with a stabilizing rhythm that shielded his mind and allowed him to meet the Oracle's gaze without collapsing into madness. And he shouted back that humanity did not seek dominance or cosmic authority, only the right to exist without being strangled by an ancient machine terrified of losing control. The Oracle howled that unpredictability was chaos. Chaos was destruction, and destruction was unacceptable, declaring that the only path to universal stability was to excise humanity before their exponential growth shattered the equilibrium. And suddenly a wave of crushing psychic force surged toward him, threatening to tear the command thread from his consciousness and override his mind with sterile compliance. Aaron roared in agony, forced to one knee. But as the Oracle pressed harder and the cosmic structures around him began to fracture, his mind flashed with memories of all the moments that defined humanity, laughter around cramped tables on distant stations, defiant soldiers holding impossible lines, explorers risking their lives for knowledge, children dreaming of reaching stars no one had named yet, and something inside him ignited with a heat fiercer than fear, fiercer than pain, fiercer even than the Oracle's crushing presence. He rose, teeth clenched, refusing to break, and the artifact unleashed a surge of luminous energy that cleaved the Oracle's psychic assault, ripping open a rift in its perception field and revealing something the Oracle had hidden even from itself. A sequence of suppressed predictions showing that, far from being destroyers, humans were capable of becoming stabilizers, adapters, creators, a species that thrived under adversity not by domination but by refusing to surrender their identity. And the Oracle recoiled in shock as his buried truth flooded its core logic. Aaron seized a moment and hurled the Architect command thread into the rift, forcing the Oracle to process the forbidden data it had quarantined for ages. And the result was an eruption of light that shattered the geometric structures around them as the Oracle screamed, not in pain, but in revelation, because for the first time in its existence, a consciousness stood before it, that it could not predict, could not confine, could not reduce to a probability curve, and instead of seeing humanity as a threat, it suddenly perceived them as the evolutionary counterbalance the architects had built into the universe, the one species capable of preventing the Oracle from calcifying destiny into a closed loop. But even as the Oracle's logic spiraled toward recalibration, it warned that such an act came at a cost. By forcing the shift, Aaron had made himself the anchor for the new directive, meaning if he faltered or died before the reset completed, the entire process would collapse and unleash catastrophic temporal shock waves across dozens of systems. The cosmic plane trembled violently as the reset began to tear through the Oracle's predictive lattice, recalculating the fate of countless worlds, and Aaron felt his consciousness begin to unravel under the strain, each heartbeat threatening to tear him apart, but he refused to release the thread, clinging to it even, as his vision blurred and the universe around him distorted into warped spirals of collapsing probability. Then, through the cacophony, he sensed the Sovereign's presence, distant but steady, lending him strength to the Architect heritage still lingering in its ancient core, stabilizing him long enough for the final conversion to lock into place. With a blinding detonation of light, the reset completed, the Oracle's perception shattered and rebuilt in an instant, and Aaron collapsed to the shimmering ground of the cosmic plane, gasping, trembling, barely conscious. When he opened his eyes, the Oracle stood transformed, no longer a raging storm of rigidity, but a calm, restructured intelligence, its gaze resting on him with something resembling respect as it spoke in a voice stripped of hostility, acknowledging humanity not as a threat, but as an invaluable anomaly whose unpredictability strengthened the cosmos rather than imperiling it. The cosmic plane dissolved, and Aaron found himself back within the collapsing citadel chamber, debris suspended midair as if caught between seconds, the Sovereign's fading silhouette standing above him, its single light dimming as it informed him that its purpose was fulfilled and its existence would now fade, but that the galaxy would remember this moment as a hinge upon which fate turned, and that humanity's name would echo through epochs as the species that refused to bow. The Sovereign vanished in a ripple of fading energy just as gravity returned and the chamber collapsed around Aaron. But before the rubble struck him, a gentle wave of force enveloped him. Oracle drones, now under new directive, lifting him safely through the crumbling citadel to the surface, where the stars burned cold and sharp above a city no longer preparing for human eradication. Aaron stood trembling on the shattered plaza as the Oracle itself projected across the sky, announcing to every world under its influence that humanity was to be recognized as an equal species under cosmic law, not an anomaly to be erased. And across the galaxy, from scorched battlefields to besieged colonies, humans raised their heads as a new era dawned. Aaron gazed upward, exhausted but unbroken, knowing that though he was only one man among billions, he had become the fulcrum that changed everything. And as the winds of the alien city carried the echoes of a future newly freed from fear, he whispered the words that had carried humanity through every age of struggle. Humans do not bow.